Are you ready to overcome the complexities and burdens that come with your success? Join the team at Centura Wealth Advisory in the Live Life Liberated podcast. Now, on to the show.
And I'm really happy to have with us today in the Centura studios, beautiful as they are. A great client of mine I've been serving David's family, David and Phyllis and his family for, I guess, 10 years now.
It's been that long, really?
It's amazing how long it's been, how fast time goes. But it's been a real joy, and it's just great to have you here. Thanks for being here, David.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate getting to spend some time. I know most of the time you and I are on a call or a late night text message, so it's good to actually be in the same room once in a while.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was great. Got to see Phyllis this morning, and just great to see both of you. Glad you're here. Thanks for being here. So I've been excited about having this conversation. As I alluded to, we've been talking to each other for the better part of 10 years, and hopefully I've made a little bit of impact in terms of wealth planning. But the real reason I think that I wanted to just kind of have a conversation with you is I feel like I've gotten as much out of the relationship over the years as you have. And I just really appreciate that about you and Phyllis. And some of the things that have resonated with me are just your transparency, your willingness to share ideas. And that's really been helpful to me, I think, in terms of things that I've done in my career. And hopefully I've reciprocated in terms of good ideas that I've shared with you. But just really appreciate you in that way. So thanks for that.
Yeah. That's how I would call it.
Absolutely. That's great. So let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you and your family and kind of what's been happening. So tell us about David Pann and the Pann family.
Yeah. So about us. So originally, my wife and I are from the Boston area, and we are high school sweethearts. So in October of 2022, we will be celebrating 35 years of marriage. We got 2 kids. Samantha, she's 28. Adam's 24. And I went to school, got a degree in computer science and business, and came out as a software engineer and spent a bunch of time in the Boston area working for Raytheon on missile systems and then startups, and eventually got the bug to move out to California. And we've been out in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, since 1990.
Wow.
And for me, my career I've been just always blessed that the network has really always opened up opportunities for me. After about 7 or 8 years as a software engineer, I moved into product management and got to work in companies like Netscape, and moved from there to do a bunch of startups. Some of them did well, some of them didn't do so well, like all experiences. Right. And then eventually went back into doing enterprise software and moved from product management and just kind of. Fortunately, I was able to just keep on growing my career with more and more responsibilities. Finally, I made my way to Yahoo and helped them run and build out their search advertising business and eventually a lot of their online advertising business. And then back in 2010, Microsoft and Yahoo were doing a big deal, and I was asked by Microsoft to come over and help grow their emerging online advertising business. And I spent the better part of 11 and a half years at Microsoft growing kind of what it was a business that was losing billions of dollars to, when I left, the team, we had built up a $10 billion highly profitable business. And all throughout that career, I just saw I was fortunate to have people around me who were willing to invest in me. And it also gave me a great opportunity to learn. So I had good coaches and mentors and managers, and that really helped me to think about, as I became a bigger leader, having more responsibility, it's not about me, it's about the team.
Right.
And that's where my whole philosophy has always been, really. It's, once you get to a certain level, your career is kind of defined. Now your job is to help everybody else define their careers. And so I feel like I've just been really blessed to have been in Silicon Valley and worked for some great companies, worked for Microsoft, and I couldn't do it without Phyllis's support. Because I've been a commuter from times I've commuted down to Houston to Raleigh, North Carolina, and for 10 of my 11 and a half years, I commuted up to Bellevue, Washington almost weekly.
Wow.
So you can't do that unless you have someone, your wife supporting you, your family supporting you. So I feel I'm pretty blessed in that opportunity.
Yeah. I remember some of the early days in our relationship, you moving back and forth between California and Washington weekly. That was challenging.
Yeah, it's especially when you're trying to you're new to a company, new to an organization, and you're kind of realizing, okay, well, there's a lot of transformation and change that have to occur. And so, but it worked out, and we were able to do some really great things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you said something there that kind of resonated with me. So things that you've learned along the way in terms of being a leader and kind of driving performance culture. And I will tell you that I've stolen shamelessly from you over the years, just sort of applying little things to my life as you've shared some things. What have been sort of kind of what's been the secret sauce, I guess, in that, in terms of building cultures?
I think that there's a couple of things that I've realized over my career. One is that just because you're a leader doesn't mean you're not human. And I think that being vulnerable, being humble, and being available really creates a unique bond. Some people have this philosophy of this really finite separation between work and life. And I don't believe that. It's hard to do that. And so Satya Nadella from Microsoft said, it's not about work-life balance, it's about work-life harmony. Wow. And I really believe in that. And so for me, it's I have this kind of things around servant leadership where my teams never worked for me, I worked for them. And then they worked on behalf of our customers. Right. And it's this kind of inverted pyramid that if you can kind of get that in the right order, then I think people, all good things can happen. I think it's also about just sharing your own personal struggles. And to be honest with you, the last couple of years during COVID really gave an opportunity for not just what was happening with the pandemic, but what was happening to society to lean into that. Right. And to be authentic with your teams about not just like what you're seeing, what you're hearing, but what you're going through. There's other philosophies I've always had and this was something that Jim Barksdale from Netscape taught me, is that the enemy is always outside the building. You're not competing with people in the building. Yeah. And a lot of times people, it's like, you feel like there's a competition between you and another organization, and hey, who's getting more of the economic benefits, and who has more of the responsibility, and who's getting more of the promotions. But if you're kind of fixated on that, then you're not fixated on your customers. And so that has always been, for me, optimizing for customers and bringing their voice into every conversation, and not let the internal politics or competition get in the way. Every organization has politics, but if you let that kind of really be the overarching theme or kind of culture, then you're really in trouble. Right. And then I think the other big thing is you have to, as a leader, you have to realize that at some point your career is less important than the people who work for you. And this was something that I always, when people would come to me and say, hey David, I really want to be promoted to a manager. And I would ask them, I said, well, why? And they said, well, because if I have a bunch of people, then I can be, get up in I can be a director or something like that. And I said, well, whose career is more important to you? Yours or theirs? Because if I become a manager, well, I just handed you 5 or plus people's careers to help coach and mentor. And, right. And if you're not willing to do that, then I don't think you're willing to be a manager. So that always kind of really, when I think about being a manager, you've got to be thinking about other people's careers. And the other big part is, to me, is this notion about hiring. And I always had this philosophy around, it's called ABC. And when I talk to salespeople, they're like, oh, always be closing. And it's not about that. It's really about what I've learned over the years is that A players will hire other A players because they're willing to learn from them. They're not intimidated. Right. B players are going to be intimidated by people, so they'll hire C players because they don't want to be shown up. And so it's always about really hiring diverse people who all want to be, great, and you see the great potential. Yeah. That doesn't mean you want to hire people who look like you, talk like you, or act like you, but you want to bring all of that together to have this authentic, inclusive environment. And you have to identify that, hey, some people may be introverts, but they're amazing. And right. And how do you bring the greatness from them out? And so that's, just realizing all that and on a regular basis has really kind of defined my kind of management and leadership styles.
Yeah, that is so good. You're going to have to start charging for that advice. I think a lot of people are going to benefit listening to this today. So great stuff. How about on the personal side? Sort of, what's happening in your and Phyllis's life? I know that you're sort of in a process right now of what I'll call a period of maybe semi-retirement. I can't imagine you actually retiring ever, but what's near and dear to your heart right now? What are you doing?
Yeah, so recently Phyllis and I decided our priorities changed. We want to spend more time with our parents as they're getting older, and their quality of life. We want to make sure we're around, we're investing time in there. So recently I stepped back from full-time work with a little bit of consulting, doing, I have some strategic advisory meetings, boards that I'm sitting on. And I think also the other big thing is I'm trying to find areas where I can give back time. We, through the work we've done together, we are blessed that we have pretty good kind of portfolio, and we created a charitable foundation years ago, and so we can, donate money, but it's easy to write a check. It's harder to write, a time. Right. And so I want to invest my time and energy. Right. I've actually found a nonprofit in the San Jose area. It's called the Recovery Cafe of San Jose. And it's a small boutique nonprofit, and they help people who are homeless, mental health issues, addictions, really recover and come off the street, find jobs, find housing. And so I'm going to start really investing time and energy into that nonprofit, and hopefully others. And the other big thing is Phyllis and I are spending more time traveling. That's going to be, now that COVID is slowly coming under control, traveling with friends who we haven't been able to do that in the past, and with the kids, and going back east to see the family. So I think I'm sure other things will pop up once I really settle into what is I'm not using the R word right now.
No way.
R word.
Not too energetic. So it's just interesting to listen to all those things that are going on. So, as you were building, another thing that struck me here is that as you were kind of focused on ways to build organizations, ways to build performance cultures, and in that process, as you gave of yourself to build your career, like that was an output of the process that wasn't necessarily the focus of the process. How or when did you sort of recognize that, as much as I'm pouring that into my work and my career, I need to kind of do that on the personal side too. Like I have a legacy I'd like to build with my family. So was there any sort of an aha moment, like, man, maybe I need to devote some more attention on this part of it?
Yeah, I think there was. I didn't think, in terms of legacy for the family. When we started working 10 years ago, kind of the portfolio probably wasn't. I wouldn't even have thought of like, okay, hey, there's a big legacy to leave.
Yeah.
And then over the last 10 years, as we've worked together and the investments have worked out, and the other, then you're starting to look at these numbers and saying, wow, these can be material. And then you can start to think about real long-term legacy. And so part of that is legacy for the kids and their kids over time, and thinking about that, because I think every parent wants their children to do better than they have. Right. But that's sometimes difficult to step it up.
Yeah.
And so I think we now come to a realization that while both our kids are employed, have good jobs, we probably don't have to worry so much about them, but that's one aspect of it, was thinking about them, but also just in working with you and Derek and the team at Centura, it's allowed us to think about legacy for how do we think about the people who need more.
Right.
How do we think about some of the charities and nonprofits that we're interested in, besides the one I mentioned earlier, but a couple of the ones that are near and dear to our hearts are things around cancer. My mom passed away from cancer. Got a couple of really good friends who have Parkinson's. Phyllis is one of her close friends, is really active in cystic fibrosis. So there's a number of areas that are, important to us, and because we feel like we're touched by those areas.
Yeah.
So we feel like those are some things that we're going to probably spend more time or donate more money towards to help in the research that goes on those.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. So a couple of things strike me as we're talking about this. So one is, as I've gotten to know you and Phyllis over the years, what's always impressive and just sort of heartwarming in a lot of ways is how much you guys work as a team together and sort of thinking about these things. So it's clear that you rely on each other to make good decisions and think about these sorts of things and give back, as you say. And the other thing is that I've gotten to know your two kids here over the last couple of years.
True.
And they were probably teenagers when I first met you, and now they're into their careers and doing well. Two of the most impressive people in their 20s, I think, that I've met, and so one of the great things about this legacy concept, I think, is that you and Phyllis are not only teaching them about wealth and sort of how to manage things, but they're picking up the lessons of like, look, we have something to offer the world, and it's our responsibility to do so. And so they're getting that. It's just cool to see that. So it's been fun to watch that develop. So where along that? So as I think about this, you understood the things that maybe you needed to do from building a legacy perspective, financial legacy, however you want to look at that. You're a smart guy, obviously have contributed a lot from a career perspective. You could have done this financial stuff on your own, maybe. What prompted you to say, I think I'll be better served just to get some help with this? Like maybe I should engage some professionals.
Yeah, I am too emotionally attached to things. I learned this years ago with Netscape stock. And I get too emotionally attached to it and keep things, longer than I should. And saw the stock, I think, 90 down to 20.
Yeah.
And so that was just a bad experience. And I realized that I have to separate things out from, I'm not a full-time money manager. I don't, spend a ton of time doing research on stocks or mutual funds or other kind of things. And I just realized that it's better to have someone who is part of the this team, but is optimizing for me, right? And we had certain experiences where we even had people who were they made money when did transactions, and that wasn't a good thing.
Right.
Or they recommended to invest in certain insurance in vehicles that didn't make sense. So we kind of stubbed our toe a number of times, and so what I really and what kind of as we got to know each other, and, I remember that first time you came to the house, and because our previous guy, financial planner, had sold the business and wasn't sticking around.
Right.
And so you and another gentleman came to the house, and that was a lot of fun. And we, it was a learning process, right?
Sure.
So it takes time to get to know somebody, and really to build that trust.
Right.
One of the things that and the reason why we've stayed together. And because, you can imagine, in the Valley, you get lots of people pinging
Absolutely.
you, hey, wealth management, this, that, and the other thing. And the thing that I've always been so impressed and why I trust you is you're one, you look at everything holistically. Number two is you're available all the time. We went to buy the car, and I'm sitting at the dealership, and I think it's Saturday night at 9 o'clock, and I'm texting you, do I buy it or finance it? Buy it, and you got back to me in seconds, right? And told me, hey, if it's under this percentage, finance it. If it's above that, write a check. And as I've gone through and talked to other people, they just don't have that kind of access, and so that to me is really, really important. And so that's why, when you decided to leave your previous company and you said, hey, I'm going to go set up my own shingle, I was like, yeah, well, just let us know. I would have gone on the first day, but you just didn't have all the legal stuff signed. And and I paid the price because that last company, they didn't file the taxes correctly, and I had to pay a little penalty. I just, with Phyllis and I, you've always been just the counsel you've given us has always been great. And you've always been available, and really we just feel comfortable and trust you, and so that's why we're here today. And I think about all of the the growth we've had. Yeah, sure, some of it was hey, working for a good company that has good stock growth, but all the other things we did, whether looking at mortgages, looking at insurance, looking at should buy the car, looking when we bought the other place in Corona Del Mar, like all of the advice we came to you that was not associated with like investment, like a stock or a mutual fund. The holistic approach to me, I didn't want to have to go to 10 different people to ask different questions. And that's what I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Appreciate you sharing that. I'm blushing a little bit, but it's been a real joy serving you to this point. So obviously in the better part of the last year, I've been in the process of moving my business, actually becoming a part of the partnership at Centura Wealth, which I think has gone really well. But you've been in a unique position of you've sort of gotten to live through that. I'm transitioning to this new company. You're learning kind of this new company's processes and how those folks work. So I would be the first to say that I personally think that you have upgraded in this process. You've gotten access to folks like our managing partner, Derek Byron, and his right hand, Samantha Lawrence. And how's that experience been so far? Have you sort of, feel free to speak freely, like, does it feel like, yeah, I've probably gotten an upgrade here, this is good? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I realized, one, again, I go back to, I really appreciate the process, because we talked about this for some time before you were thinking about moving out, and you kind of saw, hey, there's probably more resources and tools available that you could offer, and so you did the homework to go and look at a bunch of different companies, and I think you picked a great one. Working with Derek and Samantha and you again as a team, and then the extended team, right? But they're all first class, right? Like they're just top notch. Normally, I don't know if people realize that like we were meeting for months every week,
right?
For 60 to 90 minutes. To really start to put some things in place before the end of the year, and I thought it was, for me, I love it. Right?
Yeah.
Like you work me through a process, I'm good. Right? I'm like and there was an agenda, and what I really liked about the approach was that there was so much new information that was being given to Phyllis and I, trying to understand all these different trusts, trying to understand kind of real estate investments in these trusts and how they worked. And the different options to it. What I really appreciated about, with Derek and Sam and you is just the continuous process of explaining it to us.
Yeah.
And really making sure not just that I understood, that Phyllis understood.
Right.
And I knew when Derek would say, "Hey Phyllis, do you understand this?" And that I really appreciated. Right? Because like you said, Phyllis and I are a team, and I don't want to just like make a bunch of decisions and her not say, "Oh, okay, well, what's going on?" And so that whole process of going through an agenda, and again, now we're adding 2 new people and more other people to the team, and so building the trust for me is really important, and them understanding what our desires are, our goals are, and our concerns and fears, right? Because you have to kind of optimize for that, and then just doing all of the planning. Some of it, when I, to be quite honest, when we talked about it, it was like, no friggin' way does that work. Like, that's impossible. Okay, you can't save that much, or you can't, make. I just couldn't believe it, right? Because the numbers start to become mythical. But as we went through the process and explaining it, and which were, that we had from before, it opened our eyes to kind of the possibility, and it's been a great experience. And I think it's the right place for us while we're still, 9 months into it, but it feels good and we feel comfortable. And then clearly, when I was making a decision about thinking about stopping work, and came to you folks and said, rerun the numbers 3 times to make sure there's enough there that I can. It was like the turnaround was right there. So I don't, for me, building kind of that human connection in these kind of relationships are really important. Yeah. That's why, people tell me, "Oh, we work with this big institution." I'm like, no way. That's not. I just don't want to be a number. I want to be like, the Pann family and friends, and and we'll kind of work together to figure it out. As like, that's why it's interesting as the market has kind of gone upheaval since the the war. I haven't looked at our portfolio. I haven't been concerned about it.
Right.
Because you guys told me, like, don't it's not about
be
that.
fine.
Just, and so I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't, as long as there's cash flow coming in, I don't care.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, that's great. So we're talking just a little bit about the specifics on a little bit of that. So people often ask me, Roby, really, what does your average client look like? And if I could, and I would never share a client name unless they told me it was okay to do so, but I would say, well, David and Phyllis Pann probably look like our typical client. And it really sort of comes down to the clients that we serve typically have some combination of really three traits. One is they've got significant income every year that creates a big tax problem for them. Two is they've got some sort of wealth transfer issue, meaning they're going to face an estate tax eventually because their estate's currently at $12 million for a single person, $24 million for a family. Or third is people that have money in motion events, so going through a death or divorce or a sale of a business or something like that. And so as you think about kind of those characteristics, were there one or two pain points that you think have been really important that we have addressed for you?
Yeah, so I think that I'm not going to be shy about it. We've paid a lot of taxes. I live in California. Working in high tech, definitely, and paid a lot of taxes. And so, one of the things was how do you minimize that? I'm a big believer of like, okay, I'd like to do the social good with my dollars versus someone else doing it. And as we walk through the various trusts, the SLAT versus the CLAT, and I thought the CLAT was genius, and never heard about it before. And the ability to kind of put a bunch of money in there and then invest in real estate and then have that kind of as a tax write-off over the next 6 years, that seems brilliant. And it grows in there, and there's an opportunity for it to grow over the next 20 years, and that could be part of the wealth transfer, or that could be part of whatever Phyllis and I want to do with. And at the same time, there's the opportunity for a large chunk of money to go into nonprofits to do with social good that we get to control.
Right.
So that to me was like, oh, that sounds really, really good.
Right.
Then the other part, which was just for me, I hadn't thought about life insurance in the way that you and Derek and Sam presented it, as thinking about it as almost like as an asset, and that could be at times used to pay down our tax liability, or if we've all done the right thing and moved it from the left to the right on the balance sheet,
right?
Then it's an asset that can be sold off. And so those were new concepts that had never thought about or knew about in the past.
Yeah.
And the other big thing that I think that I felt good about is that there are, as kind of tax law changes, as the economy changes, I feel like everyone here kind of is going to be dynamic about bringing new opportunities to help optimize.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And so it may be something that wasn't available to us or didn't make sense here in 2022, but may make sense in 2023 or 2024 or whatever.
Right.
And so I feel good that we will look at those as the opportunities come up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, fantastic. I know you're a process guy, so from a process perspective, do you think there's been value in the process itself, just in terms of helping you to think about how all the pieces fit together and really how this helps you to think more clearly about what your legacy is, kind of the opportunities that are in front of you?
Yeah, I think it, there was the process as we kind of went through was there were, some near-term things that we had to do quickly get it done by the end of, in December of last year, right? So it was get the CLAT up and running, get it funded, and so that we could take advantage of it and then get some of, the real estate investments executed. So moving, and which we're super happy that, Centura working with MG Properties, there's some interesting opportunities out there. Then it was really thinking about kind of that, how do you use the CLAT over the next 6 years, and looking at our income opportunities that were coming up and how we would use that. So and there was always an agenda. We didn't always get to finish the agenda.
Right.
But I also did like the fact, as we brought in, there was kind of the nucleus, the three, you, Sam, and Derek, as kind of the core team, and then there, others would come in, whether it was the tax teams or the legal team. And I like the fact that Derek in particular would keep them on point.
Right.
It's like, no, that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
And so just keep it, moving along.
Right.
Was good. And then I also realized that when you have a standing meeting and something comes up, that like, hey, when I decided to, stop working, you all were available to help me kind of think through the logistics of that
right.
and the mechanics of that. And so, because I think we were meeting almost every week for probably 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And to kind of work through certain things, so that to me is, and then getting all the notes afterwards, and and doing a lot of the DocuSigns and
right.
the patience, really, because we had some people family members get involved in the process
right.
who weren't as understanding of like how to do some of these things,
right.
and the team walked them through it, so it worked out really well.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and I mean, you raise, I think, an important point that the role I think that we try to play. Well, number one is just availability, so that as these issues in life come up, we are here to help you answer those questions. But two is that sort of playing a quarterback role, because there are, at the point in life that you're at, where you've got some assets and you have important things you're trying to accomplish in life. It requires a few professionals. They're going to be attorneys and CPAs, and having that sort of one voice to coordinate it all and make sure it happens is, we think, pretty valuable. And so it's good to get that feedback that that's happening. So thank you for that. So how about just briefly on the investment front? Have there been any particular? We've talked sort of about not only these significant tax saving strategies, but have there been some investments that have really kind of like, wow, this is pretty cool. These investments marry up with these investment strategies. Has there been anything in particular that stood out so far in terms of what we're doing on the investment front, alternatives and so forth? Yeah,
I think we've always wanted to. We've dabbled in real estate, but as first and second and third homes, not as income property. And so I think for us, we're excited about being in that space through MG Properties, and so that is pretty interesting to us.
Yeah.
Whether we'll see over time whether it stays in the cloud or we make other investments. Clearly, we've talked about getting, whether Phyllis and I want to get into like rental property, and
right.
and it was good to understand a little bit of the mechanics and how that could impact our tax situation as well. So I think learning about that and what are the kind of guidelines. The other thing is we've talked about some of the other alternatives that we may look at, whether it's private equities or venture funds, because I'm involved in some small venture investments on my own.
Right.
But having access to maybe some other kind of venture portfolios would be interesting as well. Yeah. So I think we are just at the beginning stages.
Right.
And that will be, I think over time, as long as I don't have to manage it, we're good, right?
Yeah.
So, and that will be a kind of, I'm sure every year goes by, we'll kind of look at what's the best way to have our money work for us and give us the returns we need to kind of live the lifestyle we want.
Yeah, and I think that's great insight that this is always going to be an iterative process, right? So as much as you would like to sort of say, let's do this one time and be done with it and never think about the legacy planning in the future, the reality is that Washington is going to change the rules every year. There are going to be new opportunities, there's going to be new rules, and you sort of have to constantly revisit this to make sure that you're doing the best things in the current environment.
Yeah.
And so, so great to get that feedback. So the time is just sort of flying by here. So let me just maybe start to wrap this up. So obviously you've had a ton of success as an executive in the tech industry over a number of years. You're starting to maybe move towards a different phase in your life. As you think about, I know you have lots of folks you talk to, probably other, lots of colleagues that are in a similar position. Is there any sort of, what would you say to them in terms of, hey, this wealth planning thing, you need to pay some attention to this. So, this is what you should be thinking about as you approach that.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is a lot of times people want to do the vanilla cookie cutter approach. And that doesn't work because whether your situation is different. Whether your legacy is for your family or it's for charities or something else. So, and I think that what I've realized and appreciated is the customization. That's super important. And then you got to feel like you're building a team that you trust,
Right.
and that it's where I think about it is incentives are aligned. Clearly, when because I've seen this in work, and as I was thinking about this conversation, I was like, wow, there's a lot of similarities to kind of work and relationship there and here. But if you don't have incentive alignment from us to you, then it doesn't work.
Right.
And I feel like that's a critical part of it, because I don't feel like you folks are incented for transactions. You're incented around long-term growth. And the other thing is that you got to be able to have. There's lots of different paths to the end, to the destination, and I feel like with some of the other organizations, they only have one or two paths. And with Centura, what I've kind of realized is, wow, there's hundreds of paths to the destination.
Right.
And so for folks in my situation, I think that's having different alternatives gives us more flexibility, more choices. And some people, it just gives them more comfort. And so I think that if you're thinking about a wealth management company, Centura we're super happy. So congratulations, you picked the right one.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, David. So for anybody listening, if you want to check Centura out further, it's www.centurawealth.com. And so we'd invite anybody that was interested to do that. Would love to have a chat with you. So thanks for doing this, David. Just
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed this discussion, and look forward to many years of continuing to help you and Phyllis and the family.
Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate
thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Live Life Liberated podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Centura Wealth Advisory. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Centura Wealth Advisory. Centura is an SEC registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in San Diego, California. Centura and its representatives are in compliance with the current registration and notice filing requirements imposed on SEC registered investment advisors, in which Centura maintains clients. Centura may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Tax relief varies based on client circumstances, and all clients do not achieve the same results.
The presented testimonial is from a current Centura client and is for informational purposes only. The statements provided should not be considered as a representation of all client experiences, which may differ substantially.